I would buy battery-operated toys, and one of my rules when I would buy the toy was that the toy had to make some kind of sound. It would be a sound-making battery-operated toy. And I would strip it down to try to teach myself about machines. I thought this was this was fun. This was fun. So I would employ a certain number of rules, like, and I found myself pairing them on my workbench as I broke them down. And I'd only break them down to a certain point, so they were still functional. And I could fasten them to my workbench so I could watch them operate. And the pile in the studio grew of all the carcasses of these toys, because I was absolutely and completely uninterested in the image of the toy. I was only interested in this wonderful, complex machine. And at a certain point, I worked on this project, this very important art, for about a year while I did this research. And one day in a conversation with a friend, I explained how unhappy I was with this very important art. And she said, well, you know you don't have to do it. Really? But I invested all this time. She goes, no, you don't have to do it. I was like, I swear, 15 minutes, and I never thought about that work ever again. And I started making these pieces I refer to as shelf works. And at the time, what it let me do as I started to develop it was to pursue ideas that I was trying to learn as I think a fairly new sound artist. Because I was determined to work on the sound at the same time as I worked on the sculptural object and the kinetic movement. And I found that when I turned one on, and you have to get out of your mind any of these intricate ideas of control that you find in more sophisticated machines that are, controlled with a microprocessor. I'll talk about that later. These just turn on, and they do the same pattern. They don't alter their rhythm at all. So once you get to know the pattern, it's fairly predictable. So what I found that if I put them in pairs, that predictability was placed in relation to another predictable pattern, and you got counterpoint, and suddenly it went from fairly knowable to fairly unknowable really quickly. I'm going to show you a video clip. What's nice to know about these works is each one had its own switch. So when you came into the gallery, you could turn them on and off yourself as a viewer. And the shelves are about 6 by 8. I have no idea how big they are actually. Oh, I've got notes. 9 inches by 6.5 inches deep, just to give you a sense of scale. two composers were important to me at that time. Steve Reich, whose work I was thinking of at that time was his phasing compositions, and John Cage. Cage proposed something to me that I just thought was amazing. The idea that rhythm could be structure, not just pattern, so rhythm as structure, and that with this rhythm you have the division of actual time. And I feel like, in a way, this has sort of set me up for a lot of work. I'm actually going to skip this piece, and I'm going to go straight to 2 and 2, because I love that relationship. I haven't done this one before either. I can always go back to that one if we like. And I just want to read this quote by Alvin Lucier, another American composer who actually had quite an extraordinary grip on my mind at the time. He said, if a room can intrude its personality on whatever sounds occur in that room, then any other size environment can do the same thing. Lucier was trained as a composer, a classical composer. But for a good portion of his career, he actually explored fairly cutting-edge sound art that dealt with the resonance of spaces. And as an object maker, who is still really, really tied to working with places, sites, spaces, I just thought, if I could just make work like Alvin Lucier, I'll have made it. The piece is called Wawa Teapots, Landscape for Alvin Lucier. Alvin Lucier, having been high in my mind for a long time, when I was given, and there's a bunch of pieces I did where I was thinking about his way of dealing with resonant space. But he did a couple of pieces with teapots, and I had this amazing mother who loves me to death. Mothers worry about their daughters, especially in this confusing time when you don't always get married and get the china and have the children. You probably want to have careers. So she was convinced I would never get married and I would never have china. So she decided to give me china. And I was grateful. It's like, cool. I'm not married, I'm going to get china. Now, you can't be picky when somebody's just going to give you china. So she gives me this china and I actually don't like it. So I don't know what to say to her. I'm like, I've got to be the grateful daughter. No problem. A good friend of mine sees that china, and he's like, wow, you got that china, I got that china, and I don't want it. I'm divorced. I don't want to think about my divorce. So I then get 2 more boxes of this china I don't even like. And I've got 3 teapots at this point, identical teapots, and it makes sense to me to do my Alvin Lucier piece. He did this piece called Chambers. And he did a couple of pieces actually. One is Chambers. Do I have a piece, Nothing is Real, done in 1991, where he worked with this idea of the small resonant space. So in this one, it was a performance in the Museum of Modern Art where he had small sounding devices at the time and these various small objects, including a teapot. And then he did another one with a piano, and it was a bit of a combination of a piano player and then an orchestral piece playing from a small speaker inside a teapot, where he would move the teapot lid up and down as a way to change the resonant quality of the sound of the teapot itself. And I love this quote I pulled out of a book of conversations with him that says, it's an extension of what you do when you're a child at the beach and you put a shell up to your ear and you hear the ocean. Then you stop. You don't do that as you grow older. Your ear stops doing that because you've got to think of other things, how to make a living, how to speak to people, how to communicate verbally. I guess I'm trying to help people hold shells up to their ears and listen to the ocean again. And I guess for me, the idea that, sorry, I keep hitting my microphone. The idea that you could listen to an object that seems so unimportant, like a teapot, and allow it to be a resonant space that could inform a sound was really mind-blowing to me. The other thing that's really important to know about this piece is the place of technology. So I love my mother, and I would never knit or crochet like she did because that seemed like death to me as a woman. Instead, I learned how to build electronic circuits because building an electronic circuit was really incredibly relaxing to me, which I think is what happens when people knit, right? Which is a bit of a segue to Terry Riley. Does everyone know who Terry Riley is? He's like this, I apologize for bringing up so many guys, but it was a phase I was in. I was paying attention to a lot of guys. This piece, this album, he's an experimental musician, kind of experimental meets pop. And it was at a time when reel-to-reel technology was just commonplace at that point. It hadn't been, and then it did. And he was, along with a few other people, composing music using tape loops. And when I say tape loops, do you have a clue what I'm talking about? Do you know what a cassette tape is? So it's before a cassette tape when you have reel-to-reel. And the sound is actually on this magnetic tape. Instead of digitally editing, you're literally taking this magnetic tape, cutting it up, and taping it back together, and then physically playing it on a machine. It's fantastic. Why that's important is it's this idea of how you, edit, how you compose with sound in a kind of material way that interested me. And with this particular piece, I wanted to know if I could do, with technology at that moment, what people like Terry Riley were doing at the moment of tape loops. Oh, that's a lot of information. I'm not sure I'll say much more. Why don't we look at a little bit of video? Creating a Wawa effect, I do it with a teapot lid. So you kind of have a false stereo Wawa teapot, and it's Wawaing a re-recording of Ry Cooder's Paris, Texas intro, the film. I think that's enough about this piece. But you get a sense of, I'm kind of trying to figure out what it means to compose, what it means to think about sound as a material, and how these objects become kind of sort of instruments that allow me to affect sound in an analog way, even though I'm still using digital technology. I very rarely actually digitally edit sound unless I'm doing documentation. I actually find my interest is more in the physical manipulation of sound through resonant spaces, through kinetic machines. And so ironically, believe it or not, this piece was a warm-up piece for this piece, because I was scared to death of doing this piece. So I thought, well, if I make a smaller piece that's kind of piece of furniture, doing the piano will be easier. Because you can start making work and you can start to have a bit of an attitude. It's really good to have a bit of an attitude, especially as a woman. And a curator asked if I would do a project, and I was busy, and I kept trying to put him off, and I could tell he was getting irritated with me putting him off. And finally I thought, okay, I'll just give him a challenge, and he won't bug me anymore. I said, I'll do the show if you get me a piano. Because I thought, doing these kind of thinking around instruments, maybe it's time for me to do a really kind of more, like a piano piece seemed to be a work that would sit within this world of sound art and music composition. It would let me engage both at the same time. He called me the next day. I got a piano for you. And I was like, oh, damn, okay. And he goes, you wouldn't believe it. Not only did I get a piano, I got a reproducing player piano, so I got a mechanical piano for you. I didn't ask for a mechanical piano. I thought I was going to be macho and do something mechanical with a non-automated piano. So I don't know if you know what a player piano is. Oh, we'll get to that in a second. A player piano means that instead of needing a pianist to play it, it's automated using very old technology, because this piano was actually built in 1920, using pneumatic valves and really simple valve systems that are made with wood and cloth and tubing, rubber tubing. It's amazing how complicated it is and how old the technology it is. It actually plays itself. So I did Wawa Teapot while I tried to figure out what I would do. And I was kind of freaked out when I started to look at all the existing piano pieces that artists had done. I was like, what was I thinking? Like, this was stupid. Why am I doing a piano piece? And I mean, these are some of the people I was looking at the time. Gordon Monahan did this great piece called Piano Airlift. This is where I wish I was wearing my glasses. Where he, lifted it up, helicopter, and then dropped it down this. It was fantastic. I was like, oh, he's already done that. Rebecca Horn's piece I saw one time when I was in New York and rocked my world. This great piano just sort of moving across, suspended, just gliding along, and then suddenly this grand piano that had its belly up, all of the keys would just sort of explode or barf out of it. I always thought of it as kind of barfing out of the piano, and it would make this amazing sound. And then slowly, all the keys would then pull back in. It's like, I could never make something that good. It's Rebecca Horn. And then you get someone like Andrea Neumann, a German artist. She's a performer, but what she did was she took the she took the piano board and worked with just the metal frame and the strings, and it's an instrument that she actually travels with. I think it's really freaking heavy. But she's an amazing improviser. It was great to see her perform. And then I was also, of course, thinking of the composers Nan Caro and Graham. I mean, Graham is an artist, but I think of this more as a composition. What I ended up settling on, so that gives you a sense of who kind of held my brain and what I eventually decided to do. I decided to do something fairly straightforward. I decided I was going to prepare the piano. As soon as pianos were invented, people were preparing them. That's what happens. As soon as something is made, someone figures out how to hack it. It's like any piece of software, same idea. But Cage sort of became, from the contemporary experimental world, the one known for sort of making prepared pianos more well known. And what he would do is he'd take these grand pianos, and grand pianos, this is where you have to feel very impressed with me. Because grand pianos, the strings are horizontal, and what Cage would do is he would stick hardware into the strings, and sometimes he'd stick pie plates, and when key is hit, the strings vibrate, and it causes all these things stuck into the strings to make the piano sound more like a percussion object than a piano. And he did that purposefully because he was actually invited to write a piece for a dance company or to do the sound for the dance company, and all they had for him was a piano. And he was more interested in his percussion band at the time, so he thought, oh, okay, I'll just make the piano sound like my percussion band. So that's what I decided to do. I prepared piano. But my piano, this is what I was leading up to. My piano, all the strings are vertical. So how do you stick things in and get them to stay if the strings are vertical? That's where I get to be macho and go, oh, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to mechanically prepare my already mechanical piano. And this turned into a 3-year project. And this is where it gets really interesting in whatever field you end up in, where you can, present yourself with a challenge to challenge yourself, to get better at something. And this is where I actually took on I want to be a better machine builder. I'm going to tour you around the piano, and then I'll play you a clip. So the front, the back, and this cabinet is custom made to help operate the piece, and another view. And now I'm going to walk you through what I did. So this is the motor that powered the pneumatic system. So when I say pneumatic, what I mean is it's an air system. So what you have to do is you have to set up a vacuum within the piano so that when the paper roll runs past a hole, air will flood into the piano and cause one of the valves to open, and then a key will hit. So I had to pull that out of the piano in order to get at the strings to prepare them. So this is sitting out front. And I wanted to make every opportunity possible to get any sound out of the piano I could that wasn't actually necessarily the piano playing. So here you'll see this is a microphone that's miking this beautiful machine. And sitting on the floor, I'm sort of showing it to you in zones. Sitting on the floor is this little machine that plays sucks on a whistle. So I took a tube off of the piano and got it to suck on a whistle. This is the front section of the piano. And this is a detail of the paper roll that came with the piano. The piano came with a box of rolls. The amount of research I did into what role would I play I ended up doing using one from the box that came with the piano ultimately, because it ended up being about what sounded the best. And one of the key things to know about this piece is I tried to slow it down as much as possible. So my challenge to the piece, to the machine, was to get it to play as incredibly slow as I could possibly get it to play. So it took a three minute roll and had that 3-minute roll play over 41 minutes. So the paper, and this is another microphone amplifying the sound of the air being sucked into the air system of the piano through the paper roll. This is a detail of the keys. These are, this very sexy shot is actually a nightmare shot, because this is 41 vibration sensors attached to the piano strings that become the activation signals. So as the player piano plays itself, I had to figure out how to turn on these various preparations. So I could use I used a kind of max patch system so that when a string was hit, I could compose by having certain preparations play. And below, where I pulled out that beautiful pneumatic motor, I placed a machine I built, which is actually a hacked Xerox machine. And my Xerox machine strums the strings. And all of this is actually, so there's a computer, there's a bunch of gates, there's every one of those machines has a microprocessor being controlled through this max patch. So it's like this really old technology being married to this fairly new technology, and then it's turned on and off by a foot switch, which I loved. So this would just sit at the front entrance. Whoever was sitting in the gallery got to decide when the piano was turned on and off. And then they would maintain a log, because the piece was fairly complicated. I had to be able to watch the wear and tear on the piece. All that does is watch back through the piece again. Every once in a while, it's really important to challenge yourself in a way that takes you as far as you, like to the edge. Because after I did that piece, I thought, whenever somebody asked me to do something, I think, that's not a piano, no problem. So it was a really important moment for me, and I think it, I don't know, it was an important piece for me, as Susan suggested. But I think what I want to emphasize at this moment is that the piano also kind of purged me of this idea of a mainstream idea of the instrument. I kind of got it out of my system, and I'm not suggesting I might not go back to one, but it allowed me to start looking at a broader, it really propelled me forward thinking about instruments in a much broader way. I never get to talk about this piece, and I'm not sure I put in any video, but I'm going to show it to you. Because I like going from the player piano to a paper bag. It seems like a really good movement forward in my practice. This is actually a video projection. I don't do video very often, but if I'm making sometimes it's exhausting to make very complex works, so it can be really great to be in the studio and just make something on the fly and not worry about its longevity. Instead, tape it and let it exist as a projection. So with this piece, what I did was I actually made a machine. So the paper bag is actually projected as large, sort of really large, so you really feel the scale of it in the space. And when it's projected, it's actually the same bag projected, but from two different angles. So you're actually seeing the complexity of the event of this paper bag that's slowly being unfurled using this incredibly crude machine that I have two people operating. And attached to the paper bag is a contact microphone. Oh, I have some footage. I think this would be just a short document of it. Interestingly, sometimes I'm really glad when I put text in my documentation. I don't have to say it all. Interestingly, the first attempt I think it took them about 14 minutes to unfurl the bag, and by the time they got to the last attempt, they were up to 26 minutes. And while that was playing, I was sort of thinking, wow, so I'm really just interested in slow things, because I'm thinking about this piece that I'm going to show you next. I just did another version of it in Winnipeg at Ace Art Inc., which was part of Send and Receive Sound Art Festival. And when I was programming it and composing the sound, I attempted to make it go very slow too. So something about slow and open seems to inform my compositional approach. So a piano is an instrument, a paper bag is an instrument. Why not architecture as an instrument? This is Hall Walls in Buffalo, New York. I was invited to do 2 residencies around the same time, one at Oakville Galleries and one at Buffalo, New York. And I, having come through the piano and was thinking about sound composition and instrumentation, I was starting to think, well, if I can sound a piano by mechanically preparing it, can I sound a building? Can I sound a gallery space? So for Oakville, it was really the whole building I was thinking about, and with Oakville, it was this particular space. I'm trying to think how I want to talk about this. I feel like exhausted. I really did just install this piece a week ago, and it really almost killed me. What I liked about the challenge, though, is it took this piece that I had thought of as a one-off idea tied to a place in such a way that I didn't imagine that I'd ever do it again. I think that's why it maybe surprised me doing it the second time. So I'm going to maybe I'm going to go forward to this view, which I really like, because it's a really nice example of how I got to this idea of architecture as instrument in this instance. Does everyone know what an artist-run space is? Does anyone not know what an artist-run space is? An artist-run space, I would say that in Canada we started a bit earlier, late 60s, 1968, 69. And it's essentially a gallery that is started by artists, run by artists, for artists. And it's evolved over the years, but when it started out of a need. There wasn't enough places for artists to show, and they came up with this idea of making their own space that wasn't a commercial gallery, that wasn't a museum, and they could control it. And eventually they started getting funding from the government, and it now in Canada and in certain places in the States, but Canada is sort of renowned for them. There's this great system all across Canada of artist-run spaces, and it's something you really need to know about. Buffalo, Hall Walls, is this sort of space. When I was asked to do this exhibition, they hadn't been in their new exhibition space for very long. So this is where when I show in a particular place, the place can inform the decisions I make with the sculpture. So I'm telling you about the artist-run politics, because what happened, or the idea of this gallery space as an artist-run space, because they really relied on the government funding to run at that point. And as always happens with different governments, there's cutbacks, and with cutbacks you have to figure out how to continue to exist with less money. So they went from this incredibly large space to a fairly small space, quite a great space, but I'd say, I'm trying to remember, easily 1/4 of what they had. And they wanted to be inventive. And their idea to cope with this much smaller space was to build into it movable walls. So maybe I'll just use I'll point. This wall here, this is a huge wall. I mean, it's 14 feet tall easily. And it's actually on a pivot point right here. And this entire wall, you can see the wheel right here, this entire wall pivots along this steel plate in the floor. And this wall back here actually runs back and forth through the entire space. And there's actually a second wall that does that. And what that let them do is not infinitely, but many ways reconfigure the gallery, the breakup of the gallery, so that they never have to build walls for their exhibitions. So it became an affordable way to have an ever-evolving space. And I think it was a combination of that and the fact that they were in a space called Babeville. I mean, how could you resist that? Babeville. It was actually Righteous Babe Records, which is run by Scott Fisher and Annie DeFranco. They bought this really beautiful old church that was falling apart and turned it into their building, Babeville, where they had their record label. They have a huge space where they do shows with bands, and hall walls, which is a fairly eclectic kind of artist-run space that doesn't just do exhibitions, but also does a variety of programming, also is in that building. And that's how I came to architecture as instruments. I think it was worth it. When you're thinking about my whole story, I mean, I think it's important for me to get you to get a feel for how a site or a place can feed into the making of an artwork. So in my piece, this wall is now moving back and forth, and it's made of paper, and that other wall turns and also plays a record. And they're at a scale of about 1 to 6 in this version. And because I was making very simple machines, my simple back and forth machine was a lever. And because it was a lever, it dipped. And because it dipped, my wall had to be flexible. And since it was dipping and it was flexible, it might as well play strings. And since the other wall was turning and had to be on a chain drive, do I have a picture of that? Oh, those are the contact mics on the strings. And since my turning wall was on a chain drive and my motor shaft was available, and I'm in Righteous Babe Records, Babeville, I might as well put a record player on the motor shaft and play it. So this is one of those portable record players I hacked and stuck onto the piece. So let's just look at a documentation. It should play. that. There's still more to look at. Lesser and Salter and Spaces Speak, Are You Listening? Make a statement that I really love. Auditory spatial awareness is more than just the ability to detect that space has changed sounds. It includes as well the emotional and behavioral experience of space. You might have noticed, I skipped an entire show that complemented the Buffalo show, where I was working a great deal with surface resonators. You might have noticed in the piano piece, there's one shot of the back of the piano with this little white disc on it. That little white disc is actually a surface resonator attached to the soundboard of the piano. Does everyone know what a surface resonator is? They could actually call them a bunch of different names, but in sound technology, we're more familiar. You see more surface resonators now, actually. They're becoming more common. But we're actually more accustomed to our home stereos that have the Ciccone speaker. So inside the cabinet of the speaker, there's actually a large magnet, and then a paper, usually it's paper, sometimes it's fabric. And the sound signal causes the magnet, I'm seeing with my tired mind if I can explain this well, causes the magnet to move, which the moving magnet then translates that movement to the speaker, to the cone, and sends the sound wave out. That's kind of a really dumbed down idea of making how speakers work. With surface resonators, instead of using the cone, they actually, it's like the magnet without the cone, and you stick that magnet onto any surface, and then the surface acts like the cone, and it has to actually move to send the sound out. So I actually did I got completely fascinated with this technology because, as you can imagine, to my delight, I didn't have to deal with just the speaker as an object. I could put sound through any material. I mean, that's like a sculptor's dream. You pair this idea of material sound through material, and sound in particular spaces. Blesser and Salter quote of, it isn't just the resonance of a space, isn't about just how you perceive the sound. It's how you perceive the sound with your own set of experiences, with your own set of emotions, with your own set of understandings of that place. And this is sort of the trajectory I started to really try to unfold a bit more. Thinking about sound and architecture, this particular work takes the idea of a floor, not a scaled down floor, but a floor to scale, and turns it into a speaker itself. So in this instance, it's a MOBOT floor that's also a bass speaker that you can stand on or lie on, and you can experience the sound waves coming through the material of the floor into your body, as well as hearing it through the air. And this is my basement bass series. And I'm going to show you just two versions of basement bass. This particular version that you're seeing this detail of, and I'm going to show you a little video clip of this one. What I do is I actually only show this piece where there's actually a basement. And I go into the basement or the sub-basement, and I do an audio recording from that place, and then play it back through the floor itself. And it's this idea of sort of Brandon LaBelle said it really nice when he said the topography of auditory life, or the underground sonics. And I loved how you could take your understanding of a place without ever having experienced it and make any of the associations you might make with this idea of this subterranean place, whether you associate it with horror films, whether you think of subterranean creatures, whether it's a calming place, a quiet place, or a scary place. It's up to you to make those associations when you come to this sound piece. So these are some of the images from, this is the Justina M. Barnaky, which I guess is now called the Art Museum at the University of Toronto, their sub-basement that I did the recording in. And this is a short clip. And what's really important to know from the documentation is that you are not hearing most of the bass. The bass is really felt more through your body than you can possibly understand it in the documentation. That floor is 10 feet in diameter, just to give you a sense of scale. What becomes an interesting reference point for me with this piece is this idea that the instrument is one element of a larger sound system, idea of a sound system. And that was introduced to me by Julian Enrique from the book Sonic Bodies. And in that book, he's particularly talking about reggae sound system in Jamaican culture. It's this idea of bass, and if you think about it, we're going through this really interesting time with sound and how we experience sound. I mean, how many people actually have a really good sound, well, let's not say really good, a fairly satisfying stereo that they listen to music on? And how many people, oh, let's see hands. And how many people only listen through their headphones? It's this, exactly. When you, headphones, you loot that bass. That's, it's going into your, sound going into through your ears directly. Your body's not in the sound. The sound goes in through your ears. So all that bass is gone. And there's this idea of the bass culture. Now, I'm not equating my piece with the Jamaican culture, but it's how bass has that gut effect, how your body, it's being emphatically in the space and emphatically in the sound that this work became really important for me. I'm going to just show you, I'm almost done, just hanging with me. I'm not showing you a video with this piece. This is a different version of Basement Bass. I did this one in Trois Rivières, part of the sculpture biennial there. And I did this one differently. I couldn't really build the floor into the space. The space was a bit too big and the budget was a bit too small. So here the floor is more of a sculptural object. And it's a sculptural object in relation to another sculptural object. So here I have the turning floor and I have the turning record player. And with this particular version, I still have the I'm gonna just skip ahead to, it's kind of hard to see, it was really hard to photograph, but that's the sub-basement of this old, used to be a pulp and paper place. It was now a museum, and this was like nobody got to go down there. This was like leaking, dripping, water floor, crazy sub basement that I got to do my recording in. So I had that recording coming through the floor. So two surface resonators underneath the floor, and the resonators, the magnet is about this big. And I had the sound of this record sent wirelessly to a guitar amplifier that I hacked and also fit underneath the floor. So you had this kind of relationship between floor as instrument, record player as instrument, and then this relationship to the space itself, with the floor sounding the sub-basement. And these are just a few pictures from the opening. And people just, it looks so small now. That is 10 feet. It's 1 ton. That floor is 1 ton. One of the things, so instrument, bass. Instrument is one part of the sound system. Julien Enrique talks about that, but the one thing I want to say before I leave that idea is that he also talked about the space, the site, as being part of the instrument as well in terms of his philosophy of the sound system. And somehow I needed to read that in that moment. And I think I'd always preferenced the object. And in spite of all my work with sites, it was the first time that I thought about putting an object in the place and allowing myself to imagine the place as the instrument as well as the object. You might want to know the first version of Floor, the first turning version of Floor was in an exhibition curated by one of your profs, Christophe Magone. I'm not going to talk much about this piece, this particular exhibition. This was a collaborative, part of a collaborative project I did with Christophe in Berlin. But it's the first time I started to explore this new instrument that you would have seen on your posters of my work, spinning shotgun microphone. So this idea that the arc that I think is important that I want to point out here is I've come to the understanding that I can make an object that functions as a kinetic sounding sculpture, and that it can be mutable, that it can have multiple lives and be used in different ways in different circumstances. So in this instance, it was with this collaborative project with Christophe. And then just recently, this is actually the last thing I'm going to show you, so we're almost done. In this residency at Avatar in Quebec City, they have this sound studio, and I had an opportunity to spend a couple of weeks there just exploring my spinning microphones, which I swore there's no way I could spend 2 weeks just exploring spinning microphones. I mean, really. And the 2 weeks disappeared. So anyone who knows me would look at those chords and go, oh my God, that can't be you, Marla. But yeah, it is. So what you're looking at is literally shotgun microphones attached to motors that turn, and I can control this. So they run to a a little control box that I can program, and I can program patterns into them. So I can tell the microphone, you know, what direction to turn, how far to turn, how fast to turn, when to change direction. And what I want to do is something that this entire talk has been about. And it's been about how do I compose non-digitally? How do it sounds crazy because I'm using digital technology and I'm programming these microphones, but I'm interested in how I can compose in the analog world. How can I use literal movement, literal spaces to actually change a sound and not change it through digital technology? Not that I'm opposed to that, it's just not how my mind works. So in this particular setup, I've actually have a sound coming out of this cell phone speaker being picked up by one microphone and another sound, the same sound, I believe in this instance, being picked up by another turning microphone. And I'm going to end by playing you, this is just another view of the chaos, but it's partly also to show you the setup, this incredible soundproof space next to the control room that's let me play what was in this room so you could barely hear it. And then when you sat in the control room and listened, it had a big, kind of full, almost orchestral level to the sound. And what I'm going to play you is just, you're not going to get to see the machines, you're only going to get to listen. But the two microphones processing a field recording I did of this woman working a steam press at dry cleaners. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.